This story is titled, My Daughter Disowned Me and Told Me That Her Stepfather Was the Man She Deserved as Her Real Father, but later his true color shows up and she is begging me to reconcile. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit. Alright, I didn't think I'd be sharing this, but here I am. I guess I just need to get it off my chest because I don't know who else to talk to. Last year my marriage officially ended. After 16 years, it all came crashing down. I'd been suspecting something for a while. My ex-wife was always on her phone, laughing at messages, coming home later from work, and acting different. When I finally confronted her about it, she denied it at first. Said I was being paranoid and needed to trust her. But I wasn't crazy. Not 2 weeks later, she admitted she was emotionally involved with a guy from her office. Emotionally involved. Like, what does that even mean? I remember her saying, "It's not like I cheated, okay? I haven't slept with him." As if that made it better. To me, she might as well have been halfway out the door already. It didn't take long after that for us to call it quits. She said she wasn't happy in the marriage anymore, that we'd grown apart, and all the usual stuff you hear when someone's got one foot in a new relationship. The divorce process wasn't easy. Even though we kept it mostly civil, there was always this underlying tension. I knew she was texting him, probably seeing him, while we were untangling the life we'd built together. But this story isn't about her. It's about my daughter and me. Our daughter is 14, and she's always been closer to my ex-wife. They did everything together. Spa days, shopping trips, baking cookies. I never minded it before. I figured it was natural for her to gravitate toward her mom. And honestly, we had our own special connection. I used to take her out for ice cream after soccer practice, or we'd stay up late on weekends playing games or watching movies. She'd crawl up beside me on the couch with her blanket, and everything felt perfect. That's what made this whole thing so hard. When the divorce was finalized, my daughter completely pulled away from me. At first, I told myself it was just the shock of the separation. She was probably just upset or confused. I tried so hard to make her comfortable. I kept her room at my new place just the way she liked it. I'd pick her up and take her out for dinner, buy her little gifts I thought she'd like. I tried to be upbeat, never talked badly about her mom, never said a word about the affair. I thought if I showed her that I was still dad, things would go back to normal. But they didn't. Every time I saw her, she was cold. She'd give me one-word answers, barely make eye contact, and spent most of the time on her phone. If I asked about school or her friends, she'd shrug me off like it was a chore to even talk to me. The worst part was seeing her smile fade when she came to my house. Like I could tell she didn't even want to be there. I tried to give her space. I thought maybe she'd come around after a while. But one night, everything changed. It was a random Tuesday. I'd picked her up from school, and she was quiet the whole ride to my place. I figured maybe she'd had a rough day, so I didn't push. When we got to the house, I made her a snack and sat with her on the couch. I asked her how her day went. She just kept scrolling on her phone like I wasn't even there. "Hey," I said gently. "Everything okay? You seem quiet." That's when she sighed, put down her phone, and looked right at me. "Why do you even try so hard, Dad?" I was confused. "What do you mean?" She rolled her eyes. "I mean, Mom's happy now. She deserves to be happy, and her stepdad's name is a much better man for her. Honestly, he's the kind of father I deserve too." I don't even know how to describe how I felt in that moment. It was like my heart stopped beating for a second. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged like she hadn't just said the most painful thing I'd ever heard. "I'm just saying, he's better for Mom, and he's better for me too. He actually cares." I didn't yell. I didn't get angry. I didn't even know how to react. I just sat there, stunned, looking at the girl who used to think the world of me, the girl who used to hold my hand and call me her hero. "That's not fair," I finally said. My voice cracked. She shrugged again. "It's true, though." I didn't say another word. I got up and went to the kitchen because I didn't want her to see me breaking down. My hands were shaking as I leaned against the counter, trying to keep it together. She didn't realize it, or maybe she did, but she'd just shattered me. That night, after I dropped her off at her mom's house, I went home and cried. I don't even remember how long. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, just trying to process what she'd said. He's the kind of father I deserve. I kept repeating it in my head. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, thought I wasn't good enough to be her dad. The next day, I couldn't even get out of bed. I called in sick to work because I couldn't face anyone. I felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a father. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? Was I too strict? Was I not there enough? Did I somehow deserve this? My sister was the only one I told. She was furious for me. You gave your everything to that girl, she said. You've always been a good dad no matter what. She reminded me of all the times I'd been there for my daughter, all the times I'd sacrificed my time and money to make her happy. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. After that night, when my daughter told me her stepfather was the father she deserved, something in me just shut down. I didn't make this decision overnight, but it became clear that I couldn't keep living like that, chasing after someone who didn't want me. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like I was banging my head against a wall. No matter what I did, no matter how much I tried, I wasn't good enough for her anymore. And it hurt, more than I can really put into words. I spent the next few days in a haze. I avoided looking at photos of us, but everywhere I turned, there was a reminder. The old picture she'd drawn for me in kindergarten, me with a cape that said, "My superhero dad." The family trip photos on the fridge. Her soccer trophies I'd helped her win by coaching her through extra practice. It all felt like a cruel joke now. So, I made a decision to protect myself. I know that might sound selfish to some of you, but I had to. I decided I would do only what was legally required of me as a father. Nothing more. No more bending over backward for a relationship where I wasn't respected. The first step was practical. My finances. For years, I'd planned for her future. I had college savings, life insurance, and retirement accounts. All of it set up so she'd be taken care of, no matter what. But now, why should I keep sacrificing for someone who didn't see me as her dad anymore? I sat down one evening with all the paperwork spread out in front of me. The process was harder emotionally than I thought. I stared at her name listed as the primary beneficiary for my 401k and other accounts and felt that familiar pang of guilt, like I was doing something wrong. But then I remembered her words, "He's the kind of father I deserve." I took a deep breath and filled out the forms. I listed my sister as the beneficiary instead. She was the only person who had been there for me through this nightmare. She'd been my support system, listening to me vent and holding me up when I felt like collapsing. She deserved something for that. The next decision was the college fund. I know this is the part where people are going to come at me, but let me explain. I spent years putting money into that fund. I gave up vacations, skipped out on luxuries, and worked overtime to build it. I did it because I wanted to give my daughter every opportunity in life. But what's the point of saving for someone who doesn't even want you in her life? I decided to start using that money for myself. At first, I only dipped into it a little, just enough to fix some things around my house. Then my sister and I started talking about taking a trip. She hadn't been out of the country in years. And honestly, I needed an escape. I needed something to remind me that life wasn't just pain and disappointment. We booked a 2-week trip to Europe. I used a chunk of the college fund to pay for it, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. My sister and I traveled to places I'd only ever seen in pictures. Italy, France, Spain. We ate amazing food, drank too much wine, and laughed like we hadn't laughed in years. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I was living for me instead of constantly being crushed under the weight of expectations I could never meet. When I got back, I knew there was no turning back. Over the next few months, my daughter started to notice that I wasn't bending over backward anymore. I wasn't trying as hard to engage her in conversation, and I wasn't planning special outings or gifts. I wasn't cruel or unkind. I just stopped trying so hard. I'd pick her up when it was my time, drop her off, and do the basics. I didn't push her to talk or spend extra time together. I just did what was required of me. At first, I don't think she really cared. She was still so absorbed in her mom's new life and the perfect family she had with her stepdad. But eventually, she started to pick up on the changes. She'd glance at me during car rides or sit in silence for longer stretches than usual, as if she wanted to ask something but didn't know how. Then one day, everything came to a head. My daughter came over for her usual weekend visit. She spent most of the afternoon in her room, as usual, doing whatever teenagers do on their phones. I was in my office, going through some mail and organizing my paperwork. I didn't realize she'd come in until I heard the sound of papers shuffling behind me. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, startled. She had a handful of documents in her hand. I froze when I saw what they were. The beneficiary changes. "What's this?" she asked, holding up the papers. "Those are personal," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Her face was flushed with anger. "Why is Aunt Sister's name the beneficiary? What happened to me?" I didn't know what to say at first. I hadn't planned for her to find out like this. "I've made some changes," I said quietly. "What does that even mean?" she yelled. "You took me off." You're leaving everything to Aunt Sister's name now? Why would you do that? I sighed, trying to steady myself. Because, daughter's name, I can't keep pouring into a relationship where I'm not wanted. You told me your stepdad was the father you deserve. I heard you loud and clear. Her eyes welled up, but she was too angry to let the tears fall. That's not fair. That's my college money. You're ruining my future. I shook my head. I spent years saving that money because I wanted you to have the best, but you've made it clear where I stand in your life. I'm not going to keep giving to someone who doesn't respect me. You're abandoning me, she yelled. I'm not abandoning you, I replied firmly. I'm still doing everything I'm required to do, but I need to take care of myself too. I can't keep giving when it's just hurting me. She didn't say another word. She just stared at me, shaking her head in disbelief, before storming out of the room. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the desk. I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to hug her and tell her I'd fix everything. But the other part, the part that was tired of being treated like I didn't matter, knew I had to stand my ground. After my daughter stormed out of my office that day, I sat there for what felt like hours. My mind was racing, but at the same time, it felt empty. I kept replaying her words over and over in my head. You're ruining my future. I'd heard anger in her voice, but there was something else too. Something deeper that I couldn't quite place. Maybe hurt? Maybe shock? I don't know. But I didn't let myself dwell on it for long, because I had to remind myself of why I did what I did. She had made it clear to me for months how she felt about me. I wasn't wanted in her life. I was the lesser parent, the one she barely acknowledged. That stepfather of hers, the guy my ex-wife cheated with, was now the person she held up as some perfect example of what a dad should be. You can't expect me to just keep going after being told something like that, right? I didn't think so. But the confrontation stuck with me. It's one thing to distance yourself quietly, to pull back and take care of yourself. It's another thing entirely to be confronted about it and have to look your kid in the face while you explain your choices. I didn't sleep that night. I kept tossing and turning, wondering if I'd gone too far, if I was being a monster. The next day, I got a phone call from my ex-wife. Now my ex and I had been keeping contact to a minimum since the divorce. We only communicated about our daughter, school events, visitation times, medical stuff. That's it. I knew as soon as I saw her name pop up on my phone that this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Sure enough, she didn't waste any time. What the hell is going on over there? She snapped as soon as I answered. No, hello. No polite intro. Just straight to the point. What are you talking about? I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. Daughter's name came home last night in tears. She said you're cutting her off, that you took her off your accounts and spent her college fund. I sighed. I didn't cut her off. I'm still fulfilling my obligations as her father. Obligations? My ex practically spat the word like it was poison. You're her father. She's a child. How could you do this to her? And there it was. The guilt trip I knew was coming. I kept my voice steady, though. I didn't do this to her. I've been doing everything I can for her. I've tried for months to be a part of her life, but she made it clear she doesn't want me there. I'm not going to keep throwing everything I have into a relationship where I'm not respected or valued. I'm done being treated like I don't matter. She's just a kid, my ex shouted. You're the adult here. You don't get to act like this because your feelings are hurt. That stung, I won't lie. My feelings were hurt. They were shattered. But I also wasn't about to let her turn this all around on me. I'm not acting out of spite, I said firmly. I'm protecting myself. She told me her stepdad is the father she deserves. Do you know what that did to me? There was silence on her end for a moment. Maybe she didn't expect me to say that. I don't know. Finally, she replied, quieter this time. She didn't mean that, you know. She's a teenager. She says things she doesn't mean. I let out a bitter laugh. Funny how everyone always wants to excuse what she says and does. But I'm the bad guy when I decide to protect myself. Look, I'm not arguing with you about this. I'm still doing what I'm required to do as her father. But that's all. My ex didn't have a response to that. She just hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. For the next week, things were tense. My daughter didn't text me, didn't call, and when I picked her up for my visitation time, she didn't even look at me. She sat in the car, headphones on, staring out the window like I wasn't even there. At my house, she stayed in her room the entire time. She didn't eat dinner with me, didn't talk to me, nothing. I'd knock on her door to let her know food was ready, and I'd get a muffled, "I'm not hungry." I didn't push. What was the point? The silence between us was unbearable. It was like living with a stranger. And as much as I tried to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, it didn't stop the guilt from creeping in. I'd sit on the couch at night, staring at the empty seat where she used to curl up beside me, and I'd wonder, was I doing the right thing? Was I making everything worse? I told my sister about all of it. She's the only one who understands where I'm coming from. She's been through similar pain, even though she didn't have kids. You're not a monster, she told me. You're just human. You can't keep giving and giving when it's tearing you apart. You have every right to step back. Her words helped, but they didn't erase the ache I felt. About 2 weeks later, I got another confrontation. This time, it was my daughter herself. She was at my house for the weekend again, still giving me the silent treatment. I was sitting at the kitchen table, paying some bills, when she came out of her room and dropped a stack of papers in front of me. It was the college fund statement. I didn't even know she'd found it. "What is this?" she demanded. Her voice was shaking. I looked up at her. "It's the college fund." "Yeah, the college fund you're taking money out of," she snapped. "Why are you doing this?" "This is my future, Dad." I sighed. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. She hesitated, but finally sat. "I need you to listen to me, okay?" I said. "That money, I saved it because I wanted to give you the best. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, did everything I could to build that for you. But then you told me I wasn't the father you deserved. Do you know how much that hurt?" Her face turned red. "I didn't mean it like that." "But you said it," I replied gently. "And you've spent months treating me like I don't matter. I can't keep giving everything I have to someone who doesn't want me in their life. I needed to take care of myself, too." She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her expression a mix of anger, hurt, and maybe something else. Regret? Don't know. Finally, she stood up and walked back to her room without another word. And just like that, I felt like the worst person in the world. Point. After that last confrontation, the silence in my house became heavier than ever. My daughter stopped talking to me completely. Not just during visits, but in every way. No texts, no calls, nothing. She came over when she was legally supposed to, but it was like having a ghost in the house. She'd walk in, go straight to her room, and shut the door. If I knocked to let her know dinner was ready, I'd get a short "okay," or sometimes no response at all. It wasn't anger anymore. It was like we had both given up. At first, I tried not to let it get to me. I'd sit on the couch and read a book or watch a show, pretending the house wasn't dead quiet except for the occasional creak of the floor when she moved around. I told myself this was what I wanted. Distance. Less hurt. But I was lying to myself. The silence was suffocating. I'll admit something here I haven't told anyone else. Sometimes, when she was in her room, I'd stand in the hallway and listen for any sign of her. I'd hear faint sounds of music playing on her phone or her pacing the floor, and I'd feel this overwhelming wave of sadness. I wanted to knock, to ask her how her day was, to just hear her voice say something that wasn't cold or resentful, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. This silent war went on for weeks. One day, while my daughter was at my place, my sister came over. She'd brought some groceries and a couple of gifts from her recent trip for work. She's always been the kind of person who loves giving gifts, no matter how small. We were sitting in the kitchen, chatting about random things, when my sister glanced toward the hallway. "She still hasn't come out?" she whispered to me. "Nope," I muttered, not wanting to get into it. My sister sighed and shook her head. "This isn't healthy, you know." "What am I supposed to do, sister's name?" I replied quietly. I tried for months. She made it clear where I stand. I can't force her to care about me. She didn't argue with me because she knew I was right. Instead, she got up and walked to the hallway. Before I could stop her, she knocked gently on my daughter's door. "Hey, sweetie," my sister said softly. "Can I come in?" I heard a faint "yeah" from inside, and my sister disappeared into her room. I stayed in the kitchen, trying not to eavesdrop but also unable to stop myself. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught bits and pieces of their conversation. "She's just really mad," my sister said later, after she came back to the kitchen. "She feels like you're punishing her." I looked at her, stunned. "Punishing her? How?" "She sees the money stuff as a punishment," my sister replied. "Like you're taking everything away from her because she hurt you. She doesn't get that you're trying to protect yourself." I sighed, rubbing my temples. How do I make her see that? I'm not trying to ruin her life. I'm just done being a doormat. I can't keep letting her treat me like I don't matter. "I don't know," my sister admitted. "But this silence isn't helping either of you." She was right. I knew she was right. That night, I decided to try talking to my daughter. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I figured anything was better than the Cold War we'd been living in. I knocked on her door, and for once, she didn't ignore me. "Come in," she said, though her voice was flat. I opened the door and found her sitting on the bed, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at her phone. I sat down on the edge of the bed, leaving space between us. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, I spoke. Can we talk? She shrugged. About what? About everything, I said. About how we got here. She didn't look at me. You don't want to talk to me. You've made that clear. That's not true, I said quietly. I do want to talk to you. But every time I tried, you shut me out. You treated me like I was nothing. Do you know how much that hurt? She looked up then, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe sadness. I didn't mean to. But you did, I interrupted gently. You told me I wasn't the father you deserved. You chose your stepdad over me. And I get it. Maybe he's great. Maybe you like him. But that doesn't mean I stopped being your dad. She looked down at her hands, silent. I've made mistakes, I admitted. Maybe I pulled away too much. Maybe I made decisions you don't agree with. But I did it because I didn't know how else to protect myself. You have no idea how much it hurt to hear those words from you. To feel like I didn't matter to you anymore. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. I didn't mean it like that. I was mad. And you were always so serious and quiet after the divorce. It felt like you didn't care anymore. I felt a lump in my throat. I care more than you know. But I didn't know how to act when you pushed me away. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say next. It wasn't a magical moment where everything got fixed. Far from it. But it felt like the first time we were actually listening to each other, instead of fighting or shutting down. Before I left her room, I said, I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. You're still my daughter. I still love you. She didn't respond, but she didn't tell me to leave either. It had been a few weeks since I told my daughter the truth, that I wasn't going to keep chasing after someone who didn't want me in their life. Things were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. She still came over for her visits, but it felt more like a formality than anything else. She stayed in her room most of the time, and I let her. I wasn't going to force her to be around me anymore. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. It was late one Friday night when my phone rang. I was half asleep, and for a second I thought I was dreaming when I saw my daughter's name pop up on the screen. She never called me, ever. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding as I answered. Hello? Her voice came through the line, choked with tears. Dad, can I come over? I was instantly on alert. What's wrong? Are you okay? Please, she whispered. Can I just come over? I don't want to be here right now. I didn't ask any more questions. Of course, I'll come get you. When I pulled up to my ex-wife's house, my daughter was already outside, sitting on the curb with a backpack next to her. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like a kid again. Her face was blotchy from crying, and when she saw me, she stood up quickly, wiping her eyes. What happened? I asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. She didn't answer right away. She just stared out the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Can we just go? She said softly. I nodded and started driving. We sat at the kitchen table later that night. I'd made her some tea, and she held the mug between her hands like it was the only thing grounding her. She was quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. Stepdad's name cheated on Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. I hadn't expected that. What? She swallowed hard and looked down at the table. They had this huge fight tonight. Mom found out he's been seeing someone from his gym. I guess it had been going on for a while. She yelled at him and he lost it. I clenched my fists under the table. Lost it how? Her lip trembled, and I could see the tears welling up again. He started saying all these awful things. About her. About me. He said Mom was pathetic for trusting him, and he called me a spoiled little brat. He said I'm just as worthless as she is. I felt my blood boil. My chest tightened, and I had to take a deep breath to calm myself down before I spoke. He said that to you? She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Yeah. He told Mom he's sick of playing dad to someone else's kid, like it was some chore for him. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, I was furious. Furious that this man, who had been so smug and perfect in her eyes, had shown his true colors. On the other hand, I felt a dull ache because this was exactly what I had feared. My daughter had built him up as the perfect father, the man I could never measure up to, and now he had torn her down. Why didn't you call your mom? I asked gently. She was crying, she whispered. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to hear them fighting anymore. She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't know where else to go. The words hit me harder than I expected. For months, she had treated me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. Now, when her world was falling apart, I was the one she turned to. I wanted to comfort her, to wrap her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay. but I couldn't ignore the months of hurt she had put me through, the way she had chosen that man over me, thrown me aside like I was replaceable. The next morning, she came downstairs while I was making coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept, but she was calmer. "Dad," she said quietly, standing in the doorway. I turned to face her. "What is it?" She looked down at the floor, wringing her hands. "I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For everything," she said. Her voice cracked. "For saying all those awful things to you. For shutting you out. For treating you like you didn't matter. I was wrong. I thought he was, I don't know, better, I guess. I thought he cared about me more than you did. But he doesn't. He never did. I was so stupid." I stared at her for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to forgive her right then and there. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that we could put everything behind us. But another part of me couldn't forget the months of coldness, the way her words had cut me to the core. "I'm glad you're starting to see the truth," I said carefully. "But it doesn't undo everything that happened, daughter's name. You pushed me away. You made me feel like I wasn't good enough to be your dad. And now, just because he showed his true colors, you want to come back?" Her eyes widened, and she looked like I had slapped her. "I'm not asking for you to fix everything," she said, her voice trembling. I just want to try again. I want to have a relationship with you. Please, Dad." I shook my head slowly. "I don't know if I can do that." "Why not?" she asked, tears spilling down her cheeks again. "Because it's not that simple," I said. "I spent months trying to be a part of your life, and you shut me out. You treated me like I was nothing. I can't just forget that." "I was wrong," she sobbed. "I didn't know what I was doing. I was mad at you because of the divorce, and I took it out on you. I thought stepdad's name was better than you, but I was wrong. He's awful. He doesn't care about me. But you do." I looked at her, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. "I do care about you. I always have. But I can't keep putting myself in a position to be hurt again. I need time, and you need to figure out who you are and what you want." "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "You're just going to give up on me?" "I'm not giving up on you," I replied. "But I'm not going to let you hurt me again. If you want to fix this, it's going to take time. I need to see that you actually mean it, not just because things fell apart with him." She wiped at her face and nodded, though I could see how much it hurt her. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll prove it. I promise." So Reddit, please help me. Should I forgive my daughter? This story is titled, "I paid $1,300 every month to help my parents, only to discover they were funding my jobless Golden Brothers lifestyle." Hey everyone, if you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world and helps keep this journey going strong. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "I sent my parents thousands, only to discover they funded my Golden Brothers lavish life, so I cut them off and let them sink. Growing up, I, 27 male, was that guy, the dependable one, the one who handled responsibilities without complaint, because complaining wasn't my thing. My parents had me figured out from an early age. I wasn't the golden child. That title, with all its privileges, belonged to my younger brother, 22 male. I wasn't the screw-up either, so I didn't get their constant attention or concern. No, I was the workhorse, the reliable one, the guy they knew would get things done without question. And honestly, I played my role well. If there was a chore to be done, it landed on my plate. Lawn to mow? Mr. Fence to fix? Meanwhile, my brother breezed through life. He'd spend hours on the couch gaming while I was outside sweating over some household task. And when he made a mistake, my parents would twist themselves into knots making excuses for him. I'd forget to take out the trash, and suddenly I was irresponsible. My parents weren't going to change, and my brother sure as hell wasn't going to suddenly start pulling his weight. I learned to shrug it off, focusing on working hard, doing well in school, and planning my escape from that house. And I did escape. When I landed a solid job overseas, it felt like I was finally free. For the first time, I was on my own terms. No lectures, no ridiculous expectations hanging over my head like a storm cloud. I had my own apartment, a paycheck that gave me freedom, and the ability to live my life the way I wanted. It was incredible, honestly. For the first time, I wasn't just the workhorse. I was me. But here's the thing about family. No matter how far you go, no matter how much space you put between you, they're still there. My parents weren't bad people. They had worked hard their whole lives to give my brother and me the best they could. We didn't have much growing up, but they did what they could to make sure we were taken care of. And I appreciated that. So when I got settled in my new job, I decided it was time to give back. They had sacrificed so much for us. It felt like the right thing to do. Every month, I wired $1,300 into a joint account I'd set up with my mom. It was a big chunk of my paycheck, but I didn't mind. I figured it was going toward groceries, utilities, or maybe even something extra to make their lives a little easier. My mom would occasionally message me updates about how the money was being spent, fixing the roof, paying off some medical bills, and taking care of general household stuff. It felt good knowing I could help them. I wasn't living large overseas, but I didn't need to. Knowing my parents were comfortable was enough for me. For a couple of years, everything seemed fine. My parents were always grateful, and my mom made a point to tell me how much they appreciated the help. She'd call me so often to thank me. But over time, little things started standing out. Small inconsistencies in what my mom said about the money. Unexplained withdrawals. Payments to accounts I didn't recognize. At first, I didn't think much of it. As the months went by, those inconsistencies became harder to ignore. Something wasn't adding up, and the more I looked, the more I started to question everything. It was a random Tuesday night when I first noticed something strange. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just logging into the joint account to make sure the latest transfer had gone through. It has become a routine for me. I liked knowing my parents had the money they needed. Everything seemed normal at first. My deposit was there, the balance looked right, but then, scrolling through the recent transactions, something caught my eye. A $50 transfer to an account I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might have been some utility payment or a one-off expense. My mom hadn't mentioned anything about it, but I figured she'd forgotten. It was only $50, right? Not exactly a red flag. I didn't give it much thought. But then it happened again. The next month, $100 disappeared to the same account. This time, it stuck in my head a little longer. I remember staring at the screen, trying to connect the dots. Was this a subscription they'd forgotten to mention? A small debt they were paying off? Still, I let it go. Life was busy, and I figured there had to be a reasonable explanation. The third month was the tipping point. It wasn't just $50 or $100 anymore. It was $200. I couldn't ignore it any longer. These transfers weren't random. They were consistent, deliberate, and always to the same mystery account. I decided to confront my mom. Casually, of course. I didn't want to come across as paranoid or accusatory. "Hey, Mom," I said during one of our weekly calls. "I noticed a couple of smaller transfers in the account. What's that for? Is everything okay?" Her answer came quickly, almost too quickly. "Oh, just some unexpected expenses," she said, her tone light and nonchalant. "What kind of expenses?" I pressed, keeping my voice steady. "You know, groceries, little repairs here and there," she replied. "Nothing special." Still, I didn't push it. I wanted to believe her. She was my mom, after all. If she said it was nothing, maybe it really was nothing. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to the account. Every time I logged in, there it was. Another transfer. Another chunk of my money disappearing. Sometimes it was $200, sometimes $300, but it was always the same account. $300 gone, just like that. I remember staring at the transaction and thinking, that wasn't groceries or little repair. That was a lot of money, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to call her again, but this time I wasn't going to let her brush me off. "Mom," I said, cutting straight to the point, "I've been seeing these transfers in the account every month. It's always to the same place. What's going on?" There was a long pause. Too long. Then she finally said, "Oh, it's nothing to worry about. Just a few things your dad needed." "What kind of things?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm even though my patience was fraying. She replied, "Why do you keep asking how we spent the money? You are treating us like children." I told her, "It's not that I don't want to help. I just want to understand where the money's going. It's not about trust. It's about transparency." She sighed, her voice softening. "Maybe we can sit down and talk about it when you come home to visit." That was the moment I knew she wasn't going to tell me the truth. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't what I was sending the money for. I'd worked hard to put myself in a position where I could help my family, and I didn't like the idea of my money being misused. I decided to take matters into my own hands. If my mom wasn't going to give me answers, I'll let her speak on her own. The following month, I decided to test the waters. Instead of sending the usual $1,300, I sent $1,000. I didn't tell my mom in advance. I wanted to see how she'd react. When she called me a few days later, I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "I noticed the transfer was a little short this month," she said. "Yeah," I replied casually. "I figured since everything seemed to be covered, you didn't need as much." "Oh, okay," she said after a long pause. "We'll make do." She didn't argue, but something about the conversation left me unsettled. If the money wasn't a big deal, why did she sound so uneasy? A few days later, my brother called me. The guy never called. I almost didn't answer because I assumed he wanted something. And I was right. Why'd you cut back on the money? He demanded the second I picked up. What the hell are you talking about? I asked, caught off guard. Mom says you're sending less now and asking about every penny. What's your problem? My problem is that I'm sending money to help Mom and Dad, not to fund some mystery account, I shouted. It's family money, he said, his tone dripping with entitlement. Why are you acting like it's all yours? Because I'm the one earning it, I shot back. If you need something, why don't you talk to me directly instead of sneaking it out of the account? He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and hung up. That call put the puzzle pieces together with what? It was something I didn't expect. This wasn't about unexpected expenses. My brother was somehow involved, and I was going to find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. After that call with my brother, I couldn't focus on anything else. His smug tone, his fucking voice, it all gnawed at me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, the sacrifices I'd made to help my family. And now, it seemed like they were keeping something from me. I felt betrayed. I decided it was time to dig deeper. I logged into the joint account again, scrolling through the transactions with fresh eyes. Every single transfer to that unknown account stood out like a neon sign now. It wasn't just one or two, it was dozens, spread out over months. The amounts varied, but they were always there, slipping away little by little. My head was spinning as I added them up. In less than a year, nearly $5,000 had disappeared into that account. $5,000. That wasn't some unexpected expense or random bill. That was deliberate, calculated. I knew I had to confront my mom, but I wanted to give her one last chance to come clean. Maybe she'd been put in a tough spot. Maybe there was a reason for all of this, and I was just jumping to conclusions. So, during our next call, I approached it as calmly as I could. Hey, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been going through the account again, and I noticed those transfers are still happening. They're adding up, you know? There was a long pause. Too long. Then, finally, she said again, Oh, honey, it's nothing to worry about. Just a few things we've needed. My patience snapped. Mom, $5,000 isn't just a few things. That's a lot of money. And you still haven't told me what it's for. I deserve to know. Her voice wavered. It's for your brother, she confessed, almost in a whisper. Yeah, sure it was for that a-hole. I answered, For my brother? For what? I demanded, my voice sharper now. He's been struggling, she said quickly, like she was trying to get the words out before I could interrupt. Struggling with what exactly? I asked, barely keeping my anger in check. He lives at home rent-free. He has no bills, no job, and he gets a scholarship that even gives him spending money. What could he possibly need $5,000 for? She hesitated. At that moment, I knew she didn't have a good answer. It's just, he needs help, she said weakly. I snapped. Help with what, Mom? I shouted, my frustration boiling over. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie to me about it? Mom, do you know what I've given up to send you that money? I've skipped vacations, lived on a tight budget, and worked my ass off so you and Dad could have some breathing room. And all this time, you've been funneling it to him? She started crying, but I couldn't bring myself to feel bad. This wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal. Does Dad know about this? I asked, my voice cold. She didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. My dad was probably in the dark, just like I had been. I hung up the phone. I couldn't even think straight. $5,000, gone. And for what? For my brother getting drunk with his friends? His entitlement? I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into my brother's social media accounts. His profiles weren't private. He'd always loved showing off, but I'd stopped paying attention to his posts ages ago. Now I scrolled through them with a new perspective. What I found made my blood boil. Photos of him out at expensive clubs, surrounded by friends, holding bottles of champagne. A post showing off a brand new pair of sneakers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Pictures of gadgets, gaming setups, and even a shiny new car parked in our parents' driveway. The captions were the worst. Work hard, play harder. Living the dream. Grateful for my blessings. Grateful. Well, the guy had never worked a day in his life. I kept scrolling down. I found a post of him showing off the car. I'd never heard my parents mention buying a car, let alone one for him. My mom didn't even drive. So where did it come from? My own money. He was using my money to fund this lifestyle. All those transfers, all those vague excuses, They were bankrolling his nights out, his sneakers, his gadgets, and that damn car. I couldn't sit on this any longer. I called him immediately. Enjoying the car, huh? I asked the moment he picked up. Imagining him standing in front of me, I'd have smashed him in the face. There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know where my money's been going, I said coldly. How long did you think you could keep this up? Dude, relax, he said, his tone shifting from nervous to defensive. It's not a big deal. It's family money. Family money? I spat. It's my money. I worked for it. I sent it to help mom and dad, not so you could buy sneakers and pop bottles. He sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. Look, I don't know why you're so mad. You're making good money, right? It's not like you're broke. That was it. That was the moment I realized he didn't just feel entitled to my money. He genuinely believed he deserved it. I was so angry I could barely speak. You're right, I said finally. I will make more. But you? Done. I hung up before he could respond. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. After that call, I couldn't sit still. The idea of how my brother grinning like he'd earned the right to live like a king suffocated me. He's surrounded by people who probably had no idea his entire lifestyle was funded by someone else's hard work, by my hard work. And even my parents used me for his comfort. But anger wasn't enough. I needed proof, something solid to confront not just him, but my parents. I wasn't going to let them twist this into something it wasn't. If I was going to blow this up, I was going to make damn sure they couldn't get away with what they did. I checked the transactions in the joint account again. The $50 transfers had been the start. Then $100. Then $300. By the time I finished adding it all up, the total had grown to over $5,000. And that was just what I could trace. The car still didn't make sense, though. Even with all the money siphoned from me, I couldn't figure out how they'd managed to afford it. So I did something I hadn't done since leaving home. I called one of my old friends from the neighborhood. Hey, I said, keeping my tone casual. You still see my family around? Yeah, he replied. Your mom's at the grocery store all the time, and your brother, well, he's kind of hard to miss with that car. That was my opening. Yeah, about that car, I said, trying to sound uninterested. What's the deal with it? Oh man, you didn't know? He asked, sounding surprised. It's all he talks about. He tells everyone your parents co-signed for it, and he's been using their money to make the payments. Terrible. My parents didn't even own a car. How could they justify signing for one when they couldn't afford it? Thanks for the heads up, I said, hanging up before he could ask questions. I was done playing nice. If my brother wanted to live large on my dime, he was going to learn what happens when the free ride ends. The first step was shutting down the joint account. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal account and canceled all future deposits. Then I started making calls. First, the bank. Since my mom had co-signed for the car using funds I'd sent, I had some leverage. Legally, the car was tied to the account I'd been funding. After a long, tense conversation with the bank, I managed to get the car repossessed. If my brother wanted a car, he could buy one with his own money, not mine. Then I reached out to his university. I compiled a neat little folder of his Instagram posts, the car, the parties, the gadgets, and sent it to their scholarship committee. I explained how he'd been using his scholarship stipend and additional unreported income to fund a lifestyle that didn't align with their academic integrity standards. Within a week, his scholarship was revoked. You think I was done? Absolutely not. I remembered something my mom had let slip years ago. My brother had been selling sneakers on the side. Back then, I didn't think much of it. But now was the missing piece. I dug a little deeper and found out he hadn't reported any of that income. A quick, anonymous tip to the IRS, and I knew he'd be dealing with an audit soon enough. Then the drama started. The first call was from my mom. "The car's gone!" she cried. "They repossessed it. What did you do?" "I took back what's mine," I said flatly. "You co-signed for that car with money I earned, and you lied to me about it. This is on you." She tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. "You made your choice when you funneled thousands of dollars to him behind my back. Don't expect me to bail you out now?" The next call came from my brother. I was waiting for it. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted the moment I picked up. "What's wrong with me?" I replied, my voice cold. "What's wrong with you? You've been stealing from me for years and acting like you're some kind of self-made success. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? You ruined my life!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "The car's gone, I lost my scholarship, and the IRS is after me. What am I supposed to do now?" "Get a job," I said simply. "Maybe then you'll understand what it feels like to actually work for something. You're such a—" I hung up before he could finish. I didn't care what names he wanted to call me. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. This was about teaching him, and my parents, that actions have consequences, and that they cannot play with me and think I won't catch them. Without my financial support, my parents quickly fell behind on bills. They called me, begging for help, but I stood firm. Ask your golden child, I said coldly. Oh, wait, he's broke now, isn't he? They ended up having to sell the house and move into a small apartment. My brother, meanwhile, started working part-time at a fast food joint, just to keep himself afloat. He tried selling off his sneaker collection to cover some of his debts, but even that wasn't enough to dig him out of the hole he'd created. Nothing beats the feeling of keeping my money, my peace of mind, and finally putting some distance between myself and their endless drama. I don't know if my brother will ever truly understand what he did wrong, but that's not my problem anymore. Update 1 point. Hi, people. It's been a hot week, but I figured it's time for an update. Get ready because a lot has happened since I last posted. Cutting my family off financially was probably the scariest decision I've ever made, but honestly, best decision ever. When I stopped sending them $1,300 a month, it was chaos at first. My mom blew up my phone with voicemails that were all over the place. 1 minute she's crying, the next she's yelling, "How could you do this to us? We're your family." And my brother? Ghosted. Completely silent. Classic him. But once the initial guilt trip storm passed, something amazing happened. I felt free. Like, really free for the first time in forever. No more stressing about where my paycheck was disappearing to. No more wondering if my hard-earned money was funding my brother's pizza and gaming marathons. It was just mine. With that extra cash, I finally started putting myself first. I built up a solid emergency fund. Seriously, why didn't I do this sooner? And then I did something I've been dreaming about for years. I booked a freaking vacation. A week on a sunny beach, sipping cocktails, no family drama weighing me down. Absolute bliss. And get this, I've even started investing. Turns out, when you're not constantly bailing out your family, your money can actually grow. Who knew? I'm still learning the ropes, but watching my savings grow instead of shrink? Chef's kiss. Meanwhile, things at home? Not so rosy. My family was learning the hard way what life's like without their human ATM. My mom and dad stopped calling as much. Guess I wasn't as fun to talk to once the money dried up. And my brother? Still ghosting. Honestly, though, their drama's not my problem anymore. And for the first time, I'm totally okay with that. Final update. Hey everyone, I didn't plan to post another update, but here I am. Alright, so here's the part I still can't believe happened. A few weeks ago, my phone buzzes. It's my brother. The brother. The one who took my money and acted like I owed it to him. Hey, he says. And right away, I could tell something was off. He didn't sound like his usual smug self. He sounded, I don't know, tired? Be even embarrassed? What do you want? I asked, not even trying to hide my skepticism. And then he drops it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I almost dropped the phone. Like, what? Who is this guy and what has he done with my brother? I know I screwed up, he continued. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm trying to fix things. I wanted you to know that. I didn't know what to say. Seriously, I was stunned. For so long, I'd been angry, furious, actually, at how he'd treated me. I never thought he'd own up to it, let alone apologize. Finally, I just said, "Good, you've got a lot to fix." And that was it. We didn't talk much after that, and honestly, I'm still not sure how I feel about it. I mean, it's a start, but am I ready to forgive him? Not even close. For now, I'm focusing on me. I've spent enough time being the family workhorse, cleaning up after everyone else. It's my turn to live my life without all that weight on my shoulders. As for my brother, that's his mess to sort out. Whether he fixes things or not, it's not my responsibility anymore. And let me tell you, that feels pretty damn good. Tell me what y'all think.
So, before I dive into what happened, let me give you some background. I'm a 17-year-old girl living with my 43-year-old mother, stepdad, and 2 step-siblings. I have a stepbrother, Jackson, who's a year older, and a younger stepsister, Emma, who's 2 years younger. We all attend the same high school, but we're not close and don't share any friends. My mother married their father after dating for nearly 5 years, and although their wedding was 3 years ago, we've been living together as a family for 6 years now. My own father passed away when I was very young, so I don't remember much about him. They weren't married, and his family didn't approve of my mother back then due to her reputation. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with leukemia at 27, and by the time it was discovered, it was too late. He set up an education fund for me before he passed, which his lawyer managed until I turned 18. After my father's death, it was just my mother and me for a while until my stepdad entered the picture when I was around 8 years old. We all moved in together, as my mother had moved away from our old town where she and my dad had met, finding it too painful to stay. I never got to meet my paternal grandparents, as they weren't interested. My maternal grandparents are kind, but we're not very close. Moving in with my stepdad and his children gave me hope for a bigger, happier family, but reality fell short. While they never made me feel unwelcome or mistreated, our dynamic always felt off. Despite living together, we never bonded like a real family. I tried to connect, but their enthusiasm was lacking, so I eventually stopped trying. We coexisted more like roommates than a family, and I've come to accept that reality without romanticizing it. My mother was treated differently by them. They welcomed her as part of the family. I felt excluded, like they were playing happy family with her, but not with me. I might be wrong, but I think it had to do with my stepdad's ex-wife, who was a nightmare. I've never met her, but she was a gold digger who left him nearly penniless. He had to rebuild his life and take care of my step-siblings after she abandoned them. Meeting someone like my mother, who was the opposite of his ex, must have been a relief for them. But I felt like an afterthought. I can't point to specific examples, but the vibes were always there. Despite being part of the family, I never felt like I belonged. I told myself I was overthinking, but the feeling persisted. I was jealous that my mother had found her place while I was still on the outside. Over the years, I started to resent them because I felt left behind. I never brought it up because it seemed petty. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. That's just how life was. I wasn't okay with it, but I was content. Now, a couple of days ago, I started looking for colleges since I'm graduating soon and need to start sending out applications. I wasn't worried about money because my mom had always told me there was a fund set aside for me. But a few days ago, she said she needed to talk. My stepfather hadn't saved money for his kids' college, so she wanted me to share my college fund with my step-siblings. Jackson had taken a gap year and was starting college the same time as me. Legally, my mom couldn't control the funds. My father's will stated that I had control over the money once I turned 18. Honestly, I didn't want to share. I didn't see my step-siblings as family, and I wanted to use the money for myself. It could help me get a head start, like getting my own apartment, until I started earning. I had already saved a lot since I went to public school, and I was a good student hoping for a scholarship. I told my mom I wouldn't share the funds. If Jackson wanted to go to college, he could get a student loan like millions of other kids. My mom called me selfish, and I didn't disagree. I was being selfish, and I thought it was fine because I didn't consider my step-siblings family. That's when she started screaming at me. She couldn't believe I didn't think of them as family. The double standards were crazy. They had treated me like an outsider for years, but I was supposed to see them as family. I tried to stay calm, but she kept yelling, calling me ungrateful. I waited for her to finish and told her that screaming wouldn't change my mind. It would just push me further away. My mom calmed down a bit, and I hoped we could have a rational discussion. But I forgot that in that household my feelings didn't matter. Only their happiness did. After she calmed down, she gave me a week to decide. If I didn't agree, she said she'd have to kick me out of the house. I thought she was joking. It seemed ridiculous, but she wasn't. My birthday was less than a month away, and soon she wouldn't be legally obliged to let me live there since I wouldn't be a minor anymore. If I didn't agree to share the college fund my father had set aside just for me with my step-siblings, I'd be out on my own. I could hardly believe my own mother would put me in such a difficult position for the sake of my step-siblings when I was her flesh and blood. She told me to think it over carefully because this decision could cost me everything. Then she left the room. I sat there, trying to process what she said. It was incredibly insulting to be treated that way by my own mother. That day, I decided I was going to get out of this house, no matter what. I started talking to my friends, telling them I needed help finding an apartment because I planned to move out by my 18th birthday. I explained everything my mother had said and the urgency of the situation. I knew that once I turned 18, I'd get all the money and control how I spent it. Yes, I'd have to budget carefully and choose my degree and college wisely, but it was worth it. I'd finally be able to move out and live on my own instead of putting up with my family or forcing them to tolerate me. After that conversation with my mother, it was clearer than ever that I wasn't welcome in that house. I really had been an afterthought all these years. A couple of days passed, and a friend told me she had spoken to her cousin, who was applying to the same college as I was. We had an interest in the same field, so it seemed like a good lead. I wanted to live in an apartment to be independent from the start. My friend suggested I connect with her cousin, who was also planning to live in an apartment, so we could share one if we ended up at the same college. It seemed like a great idea, so I reached out to her cousin right away. We discussed everything, and I shared my situation with her. She was very understanding, and I could tell we'd get along well. With that sorted out, my next concern was where to live until college started, which was still a few months away. Luckily, my friends offered to let me stay with them until then. It was a bit of a messy and risky plan, but anything was better than living with my mom and her family after our big fight. They were treating me horribly, not by being outright mean or abusive, but by completely ostracizing me. They would give me dirty looks, stop talking whenever I entered a room, and act like I was the most disgusting person alive. It was humiliating and made me want to run away. I decided that as soon as my friends were ready to take me in, I would leave. When my mom finally spoke to me again, asking if I had changed my mind, I told her the truth. I said I hadn't changed my mind and that I was leaving. I told her the way she and her family had treated me was psychotic, and I couldn't take it anymore. I'd also let her know that I had already arranged to stay with a couple of friends. When my mom told me to leave, I was ready. I planned to stay with friends until college started. I told her I never wanted to see her again, so kicking me out didn't faze me. When she started yelling and calling me selfish and ungrateful, I left without hesitation, but I wasn't done with my plan. During my time alone in my room, I thought about how to get back at her. Since marrying my stepfather, my mom's life changed for the better, but mine didn't. She didn't seem to care about my struggles because she was happy with her new family. I tried to be supportive, but it was clear she prioritized her stepkids over me. Her treatment made me feel awful, and I was determined to make sure she faced consequences. Once I left, I decided to expose her. I waited a week before going online to ensure she couldn't reach me. I posted about how she screamed at me for not contributing to my step-siblings' college fund, even though they never treated me like family. My mom only had a problem with my behavior when it mirrored theirs. I highlighted her double standards and how she forgot about me after remarrying. I called her the most selfish person I knew for demanding I share the money my father left me. I would have considered it if my step-siblings were ever kind to me, but they weren't. I vented all my frustration in that post, knowing it would impact my mom since many of my followers were my father's friends and their kids. At that moment, I didn't care. She'd been my only source of support and happiness, and choosing her new family over me felt like the ultimate betrayal. I was deeply hurt, so I posted without thinking about the consequences. As expected, it spread widely, and my mother was devastated. She's well known, so gossip spread fast. She tried to contact me, but I avoided her calls and texts. Her messages made me feel worse, saying she never expected this from me, that I was unkind and not like she raised me. She even invoked my late father, saying he'd be disappointed. I felt awful, questioning my actions. Now I'm unsure if refusing to share my college fund was right or if I should reconcile with my mother. I feel manipulated and need guidance. Am I wrong here? Update. Thank you for the supportive messages. They helped me see clearly. I almost forgave my mother, hoping she wasn't so bad, but her hurtful words showed her true nature. I've blocked her to avoid manipulation and won't remove my post until she apologizes. She knows where to find me, but I'm staying with friends for now. So she knows where to reach me. Despite knowing if she doesn't, I'll take it as a sign she doesn't care about me and cares more about her own reputation. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since I moved in with my friend, leaving my stepfather's house. Since that post, I've had zero contact with my family. I went to school a couple of days and ran into Emily a few times. She shot me a nasty look and acted like I wasn't there, which isn't surprising. They've been pretending I don't exist for 8 years. Anyway, my mother finally visited last evening. She arrived with a black trash bag, dumping all my leftover stuff in the living room. It felt insulting, using a trash bag to pack my things, and even more insulting, dumping it on the floor for me to gather. My friend and her parents witnessed it all, scandalized. They didn't appreciate my mother's behavior one bit and argued with her about it. They told her, as my only daughter, she should show more compassion instead of treating me so poorly. They scolded her, but she didn't take it well, accusing them of harboring a delinquent like me. I almost laughed because I'm far from a delinquent. I'm a scholar. My friend stood up for me, thanking her parents were nothing like mine. It turned into a bit of a fight before my mother left in a huff. I'm grateful for my friend and her parents. They didn't need to stand up for me, but they did. It's the first time someone has fought for me, and it meant a lot. I doubt my mother will return soon after yesterday's welcome. I hope she doesn't. I'm tired of the drama. I want to move on and start anew, but I can't if she keeps showing up. I pray this is the last time that I have come across her. Last updated you. I've been pretty MIA lately, about a couple of months, I think, but it's not without reason. I've been busy applying to colleges and aiming for that scholarship. All that hard work paid off. I got into my top choice school, and remember that plan I mentioned a while back? Well, it's all falling into place. My friend's cousin, who was also applying to colleges, got accepted here too. We've decided to rent an apartment together. She's awesome, and being my friend's cousin is just a bonus. It means I can stay connected with everyone. Emotionally, it's been tough these last few months, but my friends really helped me through it all. I'm so thankful to have them. They're like family to me now. Despite trying to avoid relying on friends for emotional support before, I realize now how much they mean to me. Seriously, I couldn't have come this far without everyone's support, including all of you who reached out with such kind messages. It's funny how strangers on the internet sometimes provide more support than my own mother, who hasn't even bothered to text me since I moved out. But that's all behind me now. I'm focused on a fresh start here and excited for what the future holds.
I'm Mia, and I'm 25 now. I work as a software developer in Seattle, and let me tell you, it's a world away from where I grew up. My journey to independence has been hard-fought, but it all began with me escaping the clutches of my mother's control. To understand where I am now, you need to know where I came from. I grew up in a small town near Portland, living under the oppressive rule of my mother, Eleanor. My childhood was anything but ordinary. From the day I could remember, my mother controlled every aspect of my life. There were no allowances, no sleepovers with friends, and certainly no room for rebellion. If I did something she deemed wrong, the punishment was severe. Sometimes it was no dinner, other times it was losing access to things I loved. The freedom I saw other kids enjoying was a distant dream for me. Even though I excelled in school, Mother was always there, pushing me in directions she thought best. She chose which college I should attend, insisting it was the best fit for my future, despite my own preferences. I wanted to study in a vibrant city, but she insisted on a smaller college closer to home. It felt like she was determined to keep me under her thumb, no matter what. But college was where I first glimpsed the possibility of freedom. I managed to make some decisions on my own, and after graduation, I seized the chance to move to Seattle. I landed a job at a prominent tech company, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally living for myself. I found a cozy apartment in a building not far from the city center. It was small, but it was mine, and it felt like a fortress of independence. Life in Seattle was an exhilarating change. I reveled in the little things, walking to work, choosing my own groceries, and setting my own schedule. The first few months were blissfully normal, but I started noticing little things that seemed out of place. Strange phone calls, odd messages, nothing concrete, but it unsettled me. I pushed it aside, chalking it up to paranoia from my overly controlled past. Then one evening, my neighbor, Mr. Carter, knocked on my door. He's a graphic designer and a bit older than me, with a kind demeanor and a lean physique. "Mia, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Sure, Mr. Carter. What's up?" I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. He looked worried. "I just saw someone acting suspiciously around your apartment. I thought you should know. They might be trying to get inside." My heart raced. I hadn't noticed anything unusual myself, but the thought of an intruder made my stomach drop. "Are you sure? I mean, it could be someone just passing by." "I'm positive." "I thought you should check it out," he said firmly. My mind spun as I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. Everything seemed in place, but my anxiety was through the roof. Just as I was about to relax, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A purse that definitely wasn't mine. It was a sleek, designer piece, and it looked out of place. I was about to call the police when I noticed a note inside the purse. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a message from my mother. "I'm sorry, Mia. I had to come. I've been watching you. I needed to know if you were okay." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe it. My mother, Eleanor, was in my apartment. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. How had she found me? The purse had been a gift from her, one of many over the years. I hadn't thought much of it, but now I realized it had a hidden tracking device. She'd been monitoring my every move. I turned to Mr. Carter, who had followed me into the apartment. "My mother, she's been tracking me. She must have put a device in this purse. I can't believe she'd invade my privacy like this." Mr. Carter's face was filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Mia. That's a huge invasion of privacy. You don't deserve that." "I need to confront her," I said, my voice shaking. "She has no right to do this." I knew I had to act fast. The next steps were crucial. This was more than just a breach of trust. It was the moment I had to decide if I would let my mother's control continue, or if I would take a stand for my own life. As I made plans to confront her, a mixture of fear and determination filled me. I knew that facing her would be painful, but it was a necessary step in breaking free from her shadow. The freedom I had so eagerly embraced in Seattle now seemed to be at risk, and I needed to take control of my life once and for all. The discovery of my mother's hidden tracking device left me reeling. I couldn't believe Eleanor had crossed such a line. My life in Seattle was supposed to be my escape, my chance to breathe freely away from her overbearing control. But her presence was a chilling reminder that I was still tied to her. The next day, I took a deep breath and made my way to the address listed for her. She was staying in a small, rundown apartment not far from where I had grown up. It wasn't luxurious, but it was enough for her. As I walked up to her door, my heart pounded. I knocked, and after a long moment, she opened it. "Mia," she said, her voice betraying a mix of surprise and guilt. "I wasn't expecting you." I stepped inside, my anger barely contained. "You weren't expecting me? You've been tracking me with a hidden device, and you're surprised." Her face reddened. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe. I didn't mean to invade my privacy." I cut her off, my voice shaking. "You've been following my every move, Mom. That's not just about safety. It's control. You never let me be free." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but her defensive stance remained. "I've done it all for you. I was only trying to keep you close, to help you. Help me? I nearly shouted. By suffocating me? By deciding everything for me? I'm 25, Mom. I'm an adult. I need to live my own life. Her tears spilled over. I'm sorry, Mia. I didn't know how to let go. I've made mistakes, but I didn't know how to fix them. I stared at her, feeling a mix of pity and frustration. You're not just apologizing for tracking me. You need to understand how deep your control has gone. It was then that she revealed something I hadn't expected. I've been struggling financially. I wanted to ask you for help, but I didn't know how. The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. You were going to ask me for money? After spying on me? Eleanor nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been in debt, spending more than I should have. I thought maybe if I kept an eye on you, I could find a way to fix things. I felt a cold rage building inside me. You've been spying on me to figure out how to get money from me? That's despicable. You've manipulated and controlled me for years, and now you want to use your intrusion to solve your problems. She tried to reach out to me, her hands trembling. Mia, please. I didn't mean for things to get this way. I'm sorry. Her words felt hollow. I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't keep letting you control my life, even from a distance. Leaving her apartment, I was overwhelmed with a mixture of sadness and determination. I realized that the only way to reclaim my life was to sever all ties with her. It wasn't just about the tracking device or the money. It was about breaking free from years of emotional manipulation. Back at my apartment, I immediately started making changes. I got a new phone and set up additional security measures to prevent any more breaches of my privacy. I began looking for a new place to live, one that would be as far from her as possible. I also contacted a lawyer to begin the legal process of separating my family register from her. Each step was filled with a mix of relief and heartache. I had been so desperate for freedom, but now that it was within my grasp, the cost was more than I had anticipated. It wasn't just about moving on from my mother's control. It was about rebuilding my sense of self and autonomy. As I started packing up my things and preparing for the move, Mr. Carter was a surprising source of support. He offered to help with the logistics and provided a listening ear during the tough days. We spent more time together, and his kindness became a small comfort amidst the chaos. But the battle wasn't over. The more I learned about the extent of my mother's manipulation, the more I realized how deep her influence had run. Her actions had not only impacted my personal life, but also the way I viewed relationships and trust. The confrontation with Eleanor was only the beginning. I was about to embark on a journey of self-discovery and healing, and while it was daunting, it was also necessary. The struggle for my independence had only just begun, and I knew that the road ahead would be challenging. The days following my confrontation with Eleanor were a blur of activity and emotions. I moved into a new apartment, far from the small town near Portland where I had grown up. My new place was a fresh start, a place where I could finally feel like I had control over my own life. But even as I settled into my new surroundings, the weight of everything that had happened still lingered. The new apartment was modern, with big windows that let in lots of light. It was different from the cramped spaces I had lived in before, and I felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. The unpacking process was therapeutic, giving me a chance to reflect on how far I had come. But as I went through my belongings, I was reminded of the way Eleanor had intruded into every corner of my life. The legal separation from my mother was a significant step. It was both freeing and painful, knowing that this was the final cut in our complicated relationship. The lawyer assured me that it was a standard procedure, but it felt like a definitive end to a chapter one had struggled to close for years. During this time, Mr. Carter was a constant presence. He had been incredibly supportive, helping me with the move and offering a shoulder to lean on. We'd spend evenings talking about everything and nothing, his calm demeanor providing a welcome contrast to the chaos I had been through. Our conversations were a reminder that not everyone in my life was trying to control me. One evening, as we sat in my new apartment, Mr. Carter broached a topic I had been avoiding. "You've been through a lot lately," he said gently. "How are you holding up?" I looked around the room, my gaze landing on the empty spaces where my old life used to be. It's been a whirlwind. I feel like I'm finally starting to breathe again, but it's also hard to let go of everything that happened. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's a lot to process, but you're doing really well. This new place, the changes, you're taking control of your life. I appreciated his words. It was a relief to talk to someone who wasn't trying to manipulate me or control my decisions. Mr. Carter's support was more than I had expected, and it helped me see that there could be a positive side to all this upheaval. As weeks passed, I began to establish a routine in my new apartment. I started working on personal projects I had neglected for years, things that made me happy and allowed me to express myself. I also began to slowly reconnect with friends I had lost touch with, finding comfort in their support and understanding. Despite these positive steps, I couldn't completely escape the shadow of my past. I would occasionally receive messages from Eleanor, pleading for forgiveness or asking for updates on my life. Each time, I felt a pang of guilt but knew that responding would only drag me back into the turmoil I had tried so hard to escape. One day, as I was preparing dinner, Mr. Carter came over to help. We were talking about my new job when he suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about what's next for you? Beyond just getting away from everything?" I paused, considering his question. I'm still figuring that out. I've been so focused on just getting away from my mother and her control that I haven't really thought about what I want my life to look like now. He smiled gently. It might be worth thinking about what you want for yourself, not just what you want to escape from. You've made such a big step. What's your vision for your future? His words struck a chord with me. I realized that while I had been focused on escaping my past, I hadn't spent much time considering what I wanted moving forward. The idea of creating a future based on my own desires was both exhilarating and daunting. That evening, as I sat alone in my new apartment, I began to dream about the future. I thought about the kind of life I wanted to build, not just the absence of my mother's influence, but a positive direction for myself. It was a new kind of freedom, one that came with its own set of challenges but also with the promise of growth and self-discovery. I was starting to understand that reclaiming my life meant more than just breaking away from my mother's control. It was about building something new and meaningful for myself. And while the journey was far from over, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't felt in years. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a cautious optimism. My new apartment was starting to feel like home, and my routine was finally settling into place. I had been focusing on personal growth and rebuilding connections, but there was still one thing left unsettled: the final confrontation with Eleanor. One afternoon, as I was enjoying a quiet moment with a cup of coffee, I received another message from Eleanor. It was similar to the others, pleas for reconciliation and hints about her financial troubles. I stared at the message, a mixture of anger and sadness bubbling up inside me. It was clear she was still trying to reach out, but I had made up my mind. I couldn't let her back into my life. Mr. Carter had become more than just a supportive neighbor. He was now a true friend. Our conversations had become a regular part of my life, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't thought possible. One evening, while we were cooking dinner together in my apartment, I decided it was time to share my final thoughts about my mother. "I got another message from Eleanor today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's still reaching out, asking for money, and saying she's sorry. I don't know what to do." Mr. Carter looked up from the stove, concern etched on his face. "You've already done so much to protect yourself. Maybe it's time to consider what's best for your own well-being." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. I've been thinking about that. I know I need to let go completely, but it's hard to ignore that part of me still feels responsible. He gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's natural to feel that way, but remember, you've done everything you could. Sometimes, letting go is the hardest but most necessary step." The next day, I made a decision. I drafted a final letter to Eleanor, laying out my boundaries clearly. I stated that I would no longer respond to her messages and that any attempts to contact me would be ignored. It was a firm but respectful goodbye, and I hoped it would provide the closure I needed. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was a formal end to a turbulent chapter of my life, but it was also a declaration of my intent to move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. A few days later, I had another heart-to-heart with Mr. Carter. We were sitting in the park, enjoying the crisp autumn air. He was quietly observing the changing leaves when he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've been through so much, Mia. I'm really proud of how far you've come. But I've also noticed something. There's a light in you now that wasn't there before. You seem more at peace." I looked at him, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you. It's been a journey, but I think I'm starting to find my way. I'm learning to focus on what I want, not just what I've escaped from." Mr. Carter smiled, his eyes reflecting genuine warmth. "It's great to see you like this. And I'm here for you, whatever you need." The conversation lingered with me long after we said our goodbyes. I felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. For the first time in years, I was beginning to envision a future that was truly mine, one built on my own dreams and aspirations. As the year drew to a close, I took time to reflect on the changes I had made. My life was still a work in progress, but I was no longer defined by my past or my mother's control. I was learning to make decisions for myself and to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. One evening, while watching the city lights from my apartment window, I thought about everything I had been through. It was a strange mix of pride and relief to know that I had come out stronger on the other side. There was still uncertainty, but there was also the promise of new beginnings. In the end, it wasn't just about breaking free from my mother's influence. It was about finding my own path and having the courage to walk it. And as I looked forward to whatever the future held, I felt a sense of peace knowing that, for the first time in a long time, I was truly in control of my own life.